Alright, this should be interesting. It's time for another ranking, and today we're not just doing one country, we are going to be doing a whole region, which will include 2 rivals, 5 warlords, and a deposed emperor. Not you though, Menguquo, you only have the generic focus tree. It's time to rank all 9 Chinese paths in Hoi 4. This is going to come as a surprise to quite a lot of you, so let me explain. Number 9 is Assertiveness Manchukuo. Originally, when this video was conceived, I imagined I was going to use my original 2021 Hail to the Queen footage to cover the segment, but as it turns out, that video's footage is one of the very few that I have deleted, and I didn't feel like using the video itself, as I felt I could get better, up-to-date footage instead. So, that is what I did. And God, it was an absolute nightmare. I think the run has gotten harder since I last did it. Although I also reckon that's a byproduct of the port defense rework. But that's not the problem. As a hard run, I can deal with. It just shows that I need to work on it. The real problem appeared when I finally kicked Japan out of the mainland. Let me show you. Do you see that? Let's play that again. The Chinese United Front got the peace out with Japan, but I did not. As it turns out, Manchukuo's peace out has been broken since at least the release of By Blood Alone. Apparently, according to the forums, the devs have set the wrong value for the surrender condition, meaning it will never work. In case you don't understand, the major middle point of Manchuria's gameplay loop is completely broken. You'll be stuck at war with Japan forever. And I know what some of you are thinking, but Bubbles, you could just invade the home islands and capitulate Japan that way. Or just join the United Front. And sure, you are completely correct in that, but that's not the point. Until this bug is fixed, I see no reason not to put assertiveness completely dead last on this list. Anyway, assuming that this bug does one day get fixed, and considering this is Paradox, we could be waiting a while. What does assertiveness actually offer the player? Well, in my opinion, a fairly interesting tree. This idea of going against Japan and building up before declaring independence is actually very well put together. You start off by requesting control of the railways, diverting machine tooling, purging the General Affairs Council, preparing raid depots, and, of course, the big one, choosing between staffing the court with Manchus or 5 equal peoples. Now, I'd love to tell you that both are as good as each other, however, that's simply not true. Staffing the court is obviously the better of the two, with 4 free factories, an illegal division template, and underground workshops. 5 equal peoples has White Russian advisors and 5 people armies. The former is simply an okay national spirit, and the latter is 2% recruitable population, which as any Chinese nation really shouldn't be a problem anyway. And finally, once you've finally won your independence, what do you actually get? Well, not much if you ask me. Once you've gotten the Chinese cause, the only thing worth doing is either to subjugate the warlords, or not. And, to be fair, it is a nice focus. I'm not going to drag it down or anything. However, most of the remaining focuses don't give you any real advantage towards retaking the Empire, which, if it did, would allow me to call it quite a well-rounded tree. But as it stands, right now, it's a broken mess that I cannot give much credit to. Number 8. what would be last place at pretty much any other time. Obedience. This is Manchuria's historical path, and that is the nicest thing I can say about it. No, seriously, what is there to say about obedience? In comparison to assertiveness, you stay Japan's puppet for no real benefit. You can't even become independent via the autonomy system, as that decision is locked if you go this path. I guess there is vassalized Menguquo, which annexes them, and National Cooperation Government, which gives cores. There is also the two emperors, which sounds a lot more interesting than it actually is. When you read it, you might think, ooh, this will put us on equal standing with Japan, surely. But no, it doesn't. All it does is add autonomy. Autonomy that you can't even use to make yourself independent. I'm really clutching at straws trying to find some sort of benefit here. I guess you could say it's good for multiplayer, but come on. Any Japan player worth their salt can already take down and puppet China without Manchuria's help. I gotta be honest, I did consider saying this path is completely worthless, but then it hit me. If you invite Japanese investors, you get access to an economist. There we go, an actual benefit to doing this path. It's not a good one, as 5% production efficiency cap is almost nothing, but hey, it's something unique to this path at least. Number 7. Opposition. If you asked me which warlord path was best a few years ago, I probably would have said this one. But since then, my opinion on this path has soured considerably. And why is that? Well, it's extremely simple. Border conflicts completely and utterly suck. They're total RNG nonsense. Sometimes you win immediately, sometimes you win after a few months, sometimes you lose immediately, and sometimes you lose after many months. Now, losing itself isn't the issue, it's the punishment for doing so that is. As you lose 150 political power every time you lose a conflict. And considering most of the warlord's daily PP gain is barely 1, getting back to the required 100 political power can take a very long time. Then, of course, you have the rest of the tree, which is just fine. Public works, labour reform, and rural militia are all shared with coup with commies. War taxes is a worse opium trade. Getting your leader as a general via personal leadership is neat, and seek Japanese support is worthless. I even did a what's the point on it. Now, there is a silver lining to this tree. Once you've done proclaim rival government and have the Chinese cause, it's fairly easy to ally with Japan, take down the chuff and annex most of them on the cheap. So you still can become fairly strong with this. But I feel like other paths do this idea so much better than this could ever hope to. Number 6. Cooperation with the communists. Full disclosure on this one, this path is here purely because of the Xinjiang run I did with it last year on What's the Point. Because, let's be honest, this path realistically works best with them. The remaining warlords all start non-aligned and have a better option available to them. But with Xinjiang, it's fairly simple to unite the north of China and prepare for the Sino-Japanese War. However, what does this path actually give? Well, apart from getting rid of government corruption and ineffective bureaucracy, the best it has is allow you to take over the PRC via the Yan incident. Although this does come with the downside of the Soviet tribute, which did result in them declaring on me when I refused it. However, that wasn't a problem, let me tell you. All in all, I'm probably putting this path a lot higher than it deserves, but I don't care. I enjoyed the run I had with it, and I'm sure there's more runs you could do with it should you want to. Number 5. Nationalist China. Nationalist China presents a unique problem for this series, as they only have one path, Three Principles of the People, which has one major option within it. Let's take it from the top, shall we? Welfare is almost pointless. You could almost argue that it only exists for RP's sake. But there is an extra research slot there, so I guess fine. Democracy only exists to flip democratic and to do examination yarn. And then you have the closest thing this whole tree has to a distinct path. Nationalism. Within nationalism, you have the option to either do the United Front or to do subjugation of the warlords. Now, if I wanted to pad out this video, I could easily argue that they are two separate paths and rank them individually. But I'm not going to do that, because as far as I see, there is simply no reason to do so. The United Front is the historical path, so it's fine. And on the other end, subjugation allows you to get a lot of warlords puppeted, or even annexed if they refuse. In theory. If subjugation wasn't an RNG fest, it would be so much easier to say it was the better choice. But that's ignoring reality. It is an RNG fest. Sometimes they all say yes, sometimes they all say no. Sometimes you get the ones you want, and sometimes only the Shibe Sanma answers the call. And of course, I cannot forget the other big downside of this focus. The 300 PP you have to spend to integrate and annex your puppeted warlords. Sure, it is cheaper than the autonomy system, but still, for what looks like a better path on paper, it has so many asterisks to its name. That being said, however, both of them do what they set out to do well. Give you options before Japan goes in. The former gives you allies, the latter will give you extra units to guard your ports. Finally, there are the second Sino-Japanese war focuses, which are fine. No lie, it is kind of annoying that some of the focuses are locked until you get rid of army corruption and incompetent officers. Just getting rid of those two will cost you 500 XP. But it's a minor downside, and hey, it makes sense gameplay balance-wise. Which is more than I can say than some focus trees these days. Number 4. Marxist Orthodoxy. Ah yes, Wang Ming's big fling. Before we get into the PRC's paths, I think it's important that I bring this up. Most PRC runs start the same. Justify and annex the 3 northern warlords. Jiangxi, Shibe Sanma, and Xinjiang, all while spamming cheap units out. None of the 3 do it any better than any other, so instead we're going to be looking at other benefits to their paths to determine which is best. So, I think the best thing I can say about Wang Ming's path is that of the 3, it's the quickest to get rid of the aftermath of the Long March. He can do it relatively early with Soviet economic aid. There is also something I didn't realise until I checked recently. Due to the faction distance modifier, internationalism got an indirect buff, as this focus allows you to join the Comintern even when tension is low. Therefore, making this path the easiest way to drag Stalin into the fray, should you wish. Realistically though, this orthodox communist doesn't have much that makes him stand out. However, like all three of the PRC paths, is more than capable of uniting China under his banner. Whether they're in the United Front, Government of National Defense, or even the Comintern, you can't go wrong with him. Although you can do better. Number 3. Agrarian Socialism. The chairman's path itself. So, how does Mao beat Mr. Wang Ming? Well, if you've played this path before, you probably already know. It's Maoism, minus 10% gun production cost. And that's it really. I know it isn't much, but cheaper guns in a game like Hoi 4 is really useful. And sure, it does take Mao a bit longer to get rid of the Long March, but in the long run, it doesn't really matter. I'd love to say more, but since these two paths are so similar in gameplay and options, this segment was always going to be short. Number 2. Cooperation with the Nationalists. So, here we are. The first path that actually features the legendary Chinese power struggle. But before we get there, I guess there is the usual housekeeping. And just like the other two warlord paths, there isn't that much to say for most of the focuses. Reform the admin is fine, but then we come on to the most interesting decision. Whether or not to root out corruption, or embrace the opium trade. At least it would be a big decision, if Hoi 4 was consistent. But, as I learnt recently, you can just force a civil war, and that will get rid of government corruption, allowing you to embrace the opium trade's minus 40% consumer goods factor for no downside. It shouldn't exist, but it does as I make this video. Okay, enough distractions, time for the main attraction. Joining the Republican government and the power struggle. To keep my opinion of this brief, and so I don't have to repeat myself later, yes, the struggle can be incredibly infuriating sometimes, as it can be summarised as you versus RNG and Chiang Kai-shek. Once you look past that though, it's just clicking buttons for a while until you get the majority and take nationalist leadership. Sure, the while could be a year or two, but normally you start the struggle relatively early on, so it's not that bad. Just avoid getting support from the warlords, as that is where the big political power loss normally is. There is a certain irony to having the nationalist tree be number 5 and this number 2, when getting the nationalist focus tree is the end goal of this path. But that is fine by me. Just being able to take over nationalist China makes this path more interesting enough personally anyway. And then of course you've got all of nationalist China's focuses and gameplay, which is just a bonus. I'm guessing some of you are probably asking, why is this number 2 then? Well, it's because this has a good amount of replayability. Maybe you can follow my recent Shaanxi video and thread the narrow path between Chiang and Japan. Or something else entirely. I'm sure there are many ways to engage with this path. And by the process of elimination. Number 1. Social democracy. Yep, a power struggle path is in first place. I would talk about the path itself, but literally the whole thing revolves around the power struggle. Although I do want to mention remove Chiang Kai-shek, which does take away 15 of nationalist China's support points if you manage to do it. Although, most of the time, it isn't even necessary. Now, at this point, I was going to list a load of runs you could do with this path. However, it took up too much time, and I found it boring. All you need to know is this: I like this path, and I reckon it has a good amount of replayability. Just the options you have from the power struggle alone are more than enough to fill up a lifetime. Like, maybe you don't do it until you kick out Japan. Maybe you try and get support from the Northern Warlords, and so on and so forth. I think you get the idea. And that, as we say, is that. Now, of course, I have left some things out, like foreign investors, how annoying certain runs can be, and Chiang Kai-shek blowing up the Yellow River. But you know, that's just the way it be sometimes. And so, until next time everybody, I thank you for watching, I do hope you've enjoyed it, and until we meet again, from me, Bubbles Zest, goodbye.